And then he basically says, yo, let him go, take everything but his life. And it's interesting, even through all the emotional ups and downs that Job goes through, I think it's remarkable, not the fact that he got it back. The fact that he lost everything was a reminder that he knew, I was never really the owner to begin with. Because stewardship is for a season and for a time. When you start acting like everything you have and everything you own is yours and will belong to you forever, whether you believe it or not, whether you believe it now or when you have no choice but to believe it at your funeral and people pull on the U-Haul talent and the one talent, after the man left, they had to do something with it. The master is now gone, and the question is, what are you going to do with what you've been entrusted with? They can choose really two options. They can choose number one, stay at home by ourselves and my parents will go to work. They'd be like, oh, well, we're about to eat what we want to eat. We're about to watch what we want to watch. We're about to have a good old time. Well, it was mostly me because I was the oldest and they just did what I said. So you have one option. You can say, well, Jesus was already crucified and resurrected 2,000 years ago. He ain't been back yet. So since the master ain't coming back, I'm going to just do what I want to do. I'm going to treat things like they belong to me. I'm going to treat people like they are commodities and not human beings created in the image of God. I'm just going to casually go through life. So that's one option they have, is just to go wild. The other option they have is they can say, because I've been entrusted with something and because I know the master is coming back. The question isn't if the master's coming back. He's coming back. The whole parable of the 10 virgins above and the parable after this and the parable of the sheep and the goats, it's all about you have no idea when he's coming back. The point is you have to be ready. Because I know he's coming back anytime, that means every time I'm up, I am maximizing and developing the things that he has given me. The servant who was given 5 talents, he went and traded and got 5 more. The one with 2 talents, he went and traded and got 2 more. And the one with 1, he hid it and dug it into the ground, and he basically acted like this master was a mean and an evil man. Here's a key takeaway from this passage, or from this part in the verse. The entire parable, really, God expects you and I to actually do something with what we've been given. He actually expects us to do something. This is very similar to what Peter says in 1 Peter 4:10. In 1 Peter 4:10, Peter's talking about spiritual gifts, and as he's going through all the different spiritual gifts, he says, in verse 10, he says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another. Jesus is saying the same thing. What God has given you, use it, develop it, grow it, maximize it. Remember, he's not asking you to do something. He's not asking you to do something about what you don't have. He's asking you to do something about what you do have. And here's what I love about this parable. Each servant was given significant trust. Even the idiot who was given one who did nothing with it, he was still given a significant trust. And their master gave them a significant trust. He gave them opportunity. He gave them freedom, because he's not micromanaging, looking at them every day. And he says, it's up to you. What they did with it was up to them. The first 2 developed what they were given, and they grew it, and they went out and they did business and they doubled it. So 5 went to 10, 2 went to 4. Then the third servant did absolutely nothing with what he was given, and as a result, his life did not change one bit. And notice that we often think, oh, okay, he was, kind of even kill. Not doing anything with what you have means your plane is safe. Not true. If you think, I'm going to just be comfortable, I'm not going to do anything with what God has given me, I'm just going to play it safe, you're not at status quo. You're actually reversing, and you're actually becoming a poor steward. This is so important for us to understand, because so many Christians are doing absolutely jack squat with the things that God has given them. With the money that God has given them, with the careers God has given them, with the families God has given them, with the skills and the talents and the abilities that God has given them. They're so often the average is so wild. The average Christian is so concerned about not losing what they have because they think they're the owner. So they I don't want to lose it. They're so concerned with not losing what they have that they forget about growing what they have. and developing what they have, and the whole idea that what if God wants to give you more? I love this. This is so wild to me. So he gives each of them something individually at the start, but then he says, hey, I'm going to entrust to you something, but notice it's up to you to do something with it. Now, the average churchgoer probably doesn't like that. He's like, no, God, do a miracle all the time, every time. I want you to do everything for me in my life. You Jehovah Jireh, you all these things. You know all the names of God. And God is like, so you know who I am, right? So you calling me Jehovah God, Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nisi. You know all the Jehovahs. You know the story. You know and yet everything that I've given you, you're just sitting on it. So this is so wild. You expect me to give you something, and then you expect me to do all the work for you. So then the question is, so what you doing? It's like, oh no, because of how we operate at times, we forget that the development and the growth of what we've been entrusted largely depends on what we do with it. I love this line by Dr. Charlie Dates, the pastor of Progressive and Salem in Chicago. He says this: God determines how much is enough for you initially, but you determine how much is enough for you eventually. God determines how much is enough for you initially, meaning, here you go. This is what you've been entrusted with. But you determine how much is enough for you eventually, meaning, God, based off what you've given me, what am I going to do with it? Could you imagine a world where teenage Tiger Woods decided at 14 years old, I think I'm good enough. I'm not going to work on this anymore. Like, I'm already a 14-year-old prodigy. I'm good enough. Could you imagine a world where Whitney Houston said, I'm a kid singing at the choir here at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey. This is good enough for me. Could you imagine a world where Walt Disney says, you know what? Since I was fired from the newspaper job in my early 20s and they told me the reason for my termination was, quote, lack of imagination, I'm just going to be, I'm just a mediocre, average cartoonist. Of course you couldn't imagine a world like that, because we don't live in that world. Each and every one of those individuals were given God-given talents and abilities, regardless of where they stood with Jesus in the long run. They understood, I've been given something, and so I got to do something with it. And yet, we live in a world where Christians do the exact opposite. Oh, God, this is it? Well, I guess this is it. I'm not going to work hard at this. I'm not going to be any better at my job than I was when they hired me. I'm not going to grow my business anymore because, I don't want, more money coming in, because then more money comes in and I got to deal with prosperity. I think God just wants me to be poor my whole life. And we come up with the most asinine and ridiculous things to stay exactly where we are. And what we're really saying is, God, I ain't doing nothing with what you gave me. That should not be. We often believe more in fate, luck, magic, and hocus pocus than we do in the power of the Holy Spirit at work in us and working through us to develop us and what we're doing and what God has called us to do. This parable teaches us that really we can have two attitudes as it relates to what God has entrusted to us. We can either do nothing with it, focusing on what we can lose. It's a poverty mindset, essentially. I don't want to lose it, so I'm not going to do nothing with it. That's what the last guy did. Or we can have an attitude that says, okay, Lord, I'm going to develop this because I'm focusing on not what I can lose, but on what I can gain. Not on what I can lose, but on what I can gain. In this parable, we learn a lot about what each servant was given to start with. We know a lot about what they started with, 5, 2, 1. We know a lot about what they ended with, 10, 4, and 0, which is crazy. The brother ended with less than he started with, and he did nothing with it. Then, as the kids say, the math ain't mathing. But in the kingdom of God, if you do jack squat with what you've been given, it's not staying at equilibrium. It's actually going backwards and going into the red, into the negative. So we know what they started with, and we know what they end with, and yet we don't know a lot about the in-between. We do know the 5 and the 2 talent person, they went and they started doing business and they started actually working through it. But we don't know how long the master was away, and we don't know what each and every day looked like. And I think that's intentional. One, because it's a parable. The point of a parable, Jesus uses these stories to hit a major point. In this case, be prepared and steward everything I've given you for my glory, because I'm coming back and I'm going to give an account of everything that I've given you. But the other piece is that I think part of it is understanding that when God gives you something, whatever it is, it's not going to be a straight line. There will be times where God has given you something, and you have to take what I call calculated, prayerful gospel risk. So the guy had 5, the other guy had 2. They ended up with 10 and 4, but they had to think, okay, I mean, this is a risk. I could actually take the 5 I have, and I could lose it all. I could actually take the 2 I have, and I could lose it all. But notice, they didn't do that, because they did something with it. They said, the master has given me something. He's entrusted something to me, and he didn't give it to me for me. The master would have, because he tells the last person, the least you could do was put it in the bank. You did 0 with it. You showed no initiative, no effort, no anything. Oftentimes we think, Lord, well, I don't want to maximize or grow anything you've given to me, because what if I lose it? What if I'm working on this certification and then the economy goes under? What if I'm saving up for this big purchase and then I don't have as much as I need and I come up short? And we come up with all these reasons that stewardship just becomes a problem. And without realizing that you live in a fallen and broken world, of course you're going to have problems. Like, don't forget, the devil really don't want you to steward anything. It's interesting, what the devil wants to do is he wants to take what you have. And so the fearful person, which is exactly the reason the guy gives for doing jack with what he was given, the fearful person says, oh no, y'all not taking this. I'm gonna hold on real tight to it. And the devil he still loses it anyway. The mature person says, Lord, this ain't mine to begin with. This is yours. So I got 5. Let me take 2 real quick. Calculated, prayerful. This isn't in a text. I'm just giving you an example. Calculated, prayerful, thoughtful, gospel race. He said, okay, maybe I'm not going to give all 5, but let me see what happens if I invest 2. Notice the emphasis is on investment. Now, the third guy, he's thinking, oh, it's an expense. One of the ways, somebody is kingdom-minded and somebody is worldly-minded, they look at things for God as an expense, when those who are kingdom-minded look at it as an investment. He says, okay, I think I'm going to take this, and let me just work a little bit, and let's see what happens. Oh, 2 went to 4? Okay, well, let me take the rest of this. That prayerful, thoughtful. Why am I saying this? Some of you've been sitting on business ideas for decades. Decades. And at this point, it ain't because you're not in a great career. It's not because you can't make the move. You're just scared. Take a calculated gospel risk. For some, I remember a pastor was telling me the story of a guy in his church who was trying to holler at a girl that was above his league. Amen. By the way, I think that's the only way a brother should do it. That's exactly what I did. And so he said, Ayo, this guy, he wanted some counseling because he was like, he wants to shoot a shot at this girl in the church. And the pastor was like, in a kind pastoral way, he was like, hey man, maybe aim a little, it's hard to tell somebody she out of your league. And the pastor said, the guy was, not the most fashionable. He was still wearing kind of open-toe sandals out to church, and and no shame on open-toe, but most people when they sing and they come to church, they trying to step it up a little bit. He was not stepping it up, and he said, man, I was trying to counsel him without being mean to hey, look at that girl over there. I think she's more your, basically, I think she'll probably respond to the energy you're trying to give. He said, you know what, Ayo? I said, what? He said, they're married now. They got a couple kids. I said, what? I said, how? Where? He said, man, he had a goal. He looked at what he was interested with, which at that time wasn't a lot. But he said, I'm gonna work on it. So he just kept pursuing her, kept hunting her down. And at the end of it, the story is they got a bunch of kids and all that kind of stuff. And I thought to myself, I said, what kind of, What kind of resolve and trust in God do you have to have when your own pastor tells you that the girl you're trying to holler at is out of your league? I say, oh, you must one, be very self-aware and secure, and then you must also know that setbacks are inevitable. On the road to growing and developing everything that you have, setback and hurdles and obstacles are inevitable. Listen to this. Hawaii pastor Wayne Cadero in New Hope, Hawaii, he wrote this book, which is really good, called Doing Church as a Team. He says this: he didn't talk until he was 4 years old and didn't start to read till he was 7. One of his teachers labeled him, quote, mentally slow, unsociable, and adrift in his foolish dreams. This was often said of young Albert Einstein. Here's another one. Quote, he's too stupid to learn anything. And some teachers of a young boy named Thomas Edison. Quote, he possesses minimal football knowledge and lacks motivation. An expert said of a beginning coach named Vincent Lombardi. By the way, the Super Bowl trophy is titled the Lombardi Trophy. He went bankrupt several times and was fired by the editor of a local paper because of an apparent lack of ideas. The man they fired was Walt Disney. He failed the 6th grade and suffered a lifetime of setbacks and defeats. Finally, as a senior citizen, Winston Churchill became the Prime Minister of England. As you commit to developing all that God has given you, don't be surprised when hurdles come. Don't be surprised when challenges come. But don't give up. Do not give up. The critical error that the last servant made, he gave up. He didn't even give up. He didn't even start. He hid what he had and did nothing with it. So then the question you have to ask yourself is, how are you doing at developing and growing the things that God has given you? The resources God has given you, the talents God has given you, the career God has given you, the family, the dreams that God has given you. So you think, okay, what does development of my stewardship look like? I have no idea. The questions you need to be asking yourself is, for somebody who is me, you, who has the abilities and the gifts God has given, what's the next step in your development? Is it a certification? Is it more training? Is it reading different books? Is it going through the fast? Is it developing your prayer life? Whatever it is, whatever your next step of growth and your development of your stewardship is, take it. Don't give up and don't stop. The church I went to in college, it was in Third Ward, served a lot of families, and I was part of a basketball ministry there for a lot of the kids in the neighborhood, and a lot of these kids were coming out of some crazy, crazy wild backgrounds. And so, every time they come to the church would open up the gym every Friday night so the kids can play basketball. It was kind of a safe place, all that kind of stuff. And I will never, you go through, spend a lot of time in church, you don't remember everything, but there's some things you're like, man, I'll never forget that. I remember the pastor of the church. I remember Dr. Kilfield telling everybody, and I thought he was talking to just the kids, but I realized, man, he's talking to everybody. He knew the backgrounds and the challenges of all the kids and their home life and all that stuff. Then he says something that I have never forgot. I put it in my Evernote then. He said, none of us get to control the families that we are born into, but all of us get to control the families that we establish. I thought to myself, that's not just for these kids growing up in this neighborhood, that's for me. Basically what he's saying is, you have no control over the stewardship of what you've been given. That's the family you grew up in. But he says, oh, but the family that you start, the things that you create, you are responsible for that. In other words, how are you doing at stewarding what you have? Jesus has shown us that the trust of stewardship and development of stewardship is vitally important. But not only is stewardship a trust, not only is stewardship something that must be developed and cultivated, but finally, as we come to a close, stewardship is something that will always be rewarded. Now I'm going to read verses 19 through 30, and we'll close. He says, now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, and saying, Master, you have delivered to me 5 talents, and I've given you 5 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward saying, Master, you have delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man. That's interesting because they didn't say nothing about him being a hard man. Reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scatter no seed? Then you ought to have gone and invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast this worthless servant into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Yikes. Finally, there's an accounting. The master comes back. He does an evaluation. The master comes back and he assesses the work that every servant has done. Notice the first 2 servants, though they were given different amounts, 5 and 2, they get the same response. They get, well done, good and faithful servant. What's important is not the amount that they had, but as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. The first 2 servants got the same responses. It was commendation, it was promotion, and it was invitation. Well, first, commendation. He tells them, well done, good and faithful servant. He commends them for more precisely for their character in the way that they went about things. He says, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful. The second thing they get is a promotion. He says, because you were faithful in what you have, I'm going to give you greater responsibility. In other words, I will set you over much. I'm going to give you more. And finally, they get an invitation. Enter into the joy of your master. The third wicked, evil servant gets the exact opposite. Instead of getting a recommendation or a commendation, he gets a rebuke. You wicked and slothful servant. That's what the master called him. Instead of getting a promotion, he gets a demotion. What he had was taken from him. And he didn't get an invitation into the master's house. He was rejected and casted out from it forever. Cast this worthless servant out into outer darkness. 2 very different responses. This parable answers a question that many of us are asking and thinking, how is that fair? Ayo, how is it fair that one person loses what they had and he didn't do anything? Or the real question you should be asking is, how do I become the kind of person who gets more? The answer, be faithful with what you have right now. How do I become the kind of person that God can entrust more to? The answer is very simple. With what you have right now, be faithful with it. Dr. Crawford Loritz, he says it like this: the key to more is not asking for more. The key to more is doing more with what you have. The issue is faithfulness. Are you faithful with what you have? Now, the other question, probably the initial question you're thinking is, okay, Ayo, I don't think this is very fair. I don't like the way this parable turned out. It's not very equitable. There's no, we're not dispersing everything evenly. I was about to make a political joke, but I'm going to hold it back. Help me, Lord. I can, Ms. Johnson. You know I can. I want to, but I'm not going to do it. So I don't think this is very fair. The guy who had 1 talent had that talent taken from him and given to the guy who had 10. If you're reading this, you're just thinking, listen, I'm not a scholar, but it looks like the rich getting richer. You say, oh, that's not fair. The point is not about fairness. The point is about faithfulness. It's not about remember, the owner and the master owns everything. The servants they own nothing at all. The fact that they were giving anything was a gift from the master and the owner. What they were given was based off of their ability, and they were supposed to do something with what they gave them. The third guy says, I'm not doing anything with it. So the owner who owns everything says, I have the absolute right, because it all belongs to me, to take what you have since you didn't do nothing with it anyway, and I'm going to give it to the one who's already been producing even more. It is entirely his prerogative because it all belongs to him. And remember, the hardest part of this is that this isn't the guy didn't get what was taken from him because he sinned. Most of us think about, oh, he must have did something bad. Like, we think his issue is the sin of commission. Somebody say commission. The sin of commission, that's easy. That's when you do something you're not supposed to do. That's when you lie, steal, cheat, all of that stuff. The sin of commission is what religious people love pointing out because it makes them feel better about the decisions they make, because it's easy to see. His problem isn't the sin of commission, it's the sin of omission. Somebody say omission. Omission is when you don't do what you're supposed to do. Perfect example, Adam and Eve in the garden. God says, hey, to Adam, all of it in here, you good. Run wild. Eat it all. Just don't touch that thing. Eve, the serpent gives the fruit to Eve. She eats it, so she commits the sin first. But then the Bible says her husband was standing right there with her. So you may think like, oh man, why we always giving,